Welcome to the Cheating and Love Tales channel. Sometimes I stand at the bathroom sink, palms pressed against the cool porcelain, staring into the mirror until my reflection blurs. That was exactly how it started the night I found her phone number scrawled across the fogged glass. Her reflection hovered behind me, damp hair dripping onto her shoulders, eyes wide with a kind of guilt she couldn't hide. Steam still clung to the air, and the ink from that phone number boiled and smeared down the mirror's surface like tears. I'd never felt so cold in my life. Even the shower's leftover heat couldn't warm me. I was hollow, lost, disbelieving. But there it was, physical proof that everything she claimed. They're just dance lessons, sweetheart. I'm exploring a new hobby. Was a lie. I'm Mark Lawson, 42 years old, Houston-born Texan with a job in sales, a father's watch on my wrist, and more heartbreak than I ever asked for. I'm not one for fancy words, so I'll tell it like it is. This story isn't about second chances or redemption. It's about betrayal, pure and simple. It's about a man who discovered his wife, Isabella, the woman he trusted more than his own reflection, sleeping with another man. And not just any man. She chose some hot-blooded dance instructor, the kind of smooth-talking bastard who glides into your life on quiet feet, gets you swirling in his arms, and twists your entire world before you know you've even moved. I try to recall the moment it all broke. Maybe it was the number on the mirror. Maybe it was the day the DNA test came back. I'd started having suspicions that, after months of lessons, something else was going on. That was a dark place to be, wondering if the child you've been trying for, if the unborn possibility you pinned your last hopes on, might not even be yours. Turned out the test shattered me. The cruelty of that neon sign blinking over her head was too real to ignore. But I'm skipping ahead. Let me back up. Let me show you how it felt. I remember running my finger along the mirror, smearing the ink. My reflection. Same old Mark, but with a thunderstorm raging behind his eyes. I turned around slowly. She was half wrapped in a towel, hugging it against her body, as though it could shield her from the accusation in my face. I didn't speak at first. The tension in the room was strangling. What does that say? I asked, pointing at the mirror. My voice was calm, too calm. I felt like a corpse talking. She swallowed hard, wouldn't look me in the eye. Just a number I needed to, for the next dance session. You're lying, I said softly. Even as I said it, I pictured her in a dance studio, sweaty bodies pressing together, that man's hands on her hips, on what was supposed to be mine and mine alone. I'm not the possessive type, but my mind conjured every vile possibility of their closeness, the music thrumming in the background like some cheap romance. My chest tightened. She shook her head. No, Mark, you're mistaken. You don't understand. It's for private lessons, advanced techniques. Enzo suggested. Enzo. I spat his name like a curse. I bet he suggested plenty. She took a small step forward. Water dripped from her hair. One droplet meandered across her collarbone and disappeared into the towel's edge. Please, listen. It's nothing. It's not. I turned on my heel and walked out, letting the door slam behind me. Maybe that was the moment my soul snapped. It's funny how betrayal can echo in every corner of your life. I remember the next day at the bar, telling the guys. I was trying to drown my fury in cheap whiskey, but it kept surfacing. My friend Marcus, who's known me since high school, said, "Just talk to her. Maybe it's a misunderstanding." But I couldn't. My pride was strangling any rational thought. Talk to her. Talk to her about what exactly? I barked. About how she's letting some tango teacher rub his sweaty chest against hers. My voice had a bitter edge. Another friend, Sam, tried to calm me down, but I was gone. Something in me had died, or maybe something had been born. Something new and hateful. I told them everything. The phone number. The suspicious nights. The moment I realized she was stepping out with him. And I told them about the test results too. That one left them speechless. The idea that the woman I called my wife might be carrying another man's child had them eyeing me like a rabid dog. They didn't want to poke me too hard, but I was more than happy to stoke the flames of my own fury. I told her sister next. I called her up that same night, half drunk and thoroughly devastated. I needed the pain to be known, to brand Isabella as the traitor she was. Her sister Patricia gasped, pleaded with me to be sure of the facts. But I just hammered away at Isabella's reputation. For every ounce of heartbreak I felt, I wanted to heap an equal measure of shame on her. Looking back, that was me lashing out like a wounded animal. But in the moment, I felt justified. She had taken something sacred from me, so I was going to tear down what was sacred to her. Her good name, her sense of community, her facade of being the sweet, devoted wife. It was all a lie. I told the neighbors too. The folks next door who'd once invited us to barbecues. I let them know I wouldn't be showing up with Isabella anymore, because she'd sold her vows for a tango and a thrill. I watched their eyes widen. Their words got hushed when they saw her in the driveway, and she, in turn, would look at me with pleading eyes. "Mark, stop," she'd whisper when we were alone. "You're hurting me." But I couldn't stop. It felt like a vendetta, and I was riding it straight to hell. If I was going to suffer, so was she. That's the darkest part of me. The Mark who once promised to protect her no matter what had vanished. In his place stood a man who believed that justice meant retribution. Maybe it was the heartbreak. Maybe it was my father's stern moral code twisted in my head, spurring me on, whispering that a vow-breaker deserves no mercy. All the while, I pictured Enzo, tall, lean, with that European swagger. I pictured him pressing against her, his hands on her waist, guiding her through every step. I pictured them sweaty, breathless, a private lesson evolving into something that no decent married woman should allow. The thoughts burned like acid. I checked my phone at odd hours, half expecting a text from him. Some smug taunt. I grew obsessed with the idea that he was out there, enjoying everything I'd once taken for granted. Every night I confronted Isabella, the tension thick as tar. On one of those nights, she stood in our dimly lit living room, arms crossed, avoiding my gaze. I let out a slow breath. "What is loyalty to you?" I asked. The question was simple, but it hung in the air like a noose. She shifted uncomfortably. "Mark, No, answer me." My voice cracked. "What is it?" "A word. A contract you can break whenever you find a more exciting bed." She winced. "I'm not proud of what happened," she said, eyes downcast. "But I didn't mean for it to go this far. You were always gone, traveling for work, busy with your own worries. And I felt alone. I needed to feel something." The fury rose in my throat. "You needed to feel something, so you let him feel you." I paused. The disgust twisted my stomach. "I worked to keep this family afloat. That's what I did." She was crying now, silently. "I know. I messed up. I was weak. But this isn't who I am." I barked a laugh that was empty of humor. "It sure looks like who you are." She tried to approach, but I stepped back. All I could see was Enzo's phantom arms around her. My chest burned. She was sobbing, but it only fueled my anger. My hands balled into fists. For a second, a thought flashed. Do something. Hurt her the way she hurt you. But I'm not a monster. Not physically, at least. I turned away, letting her tears fall on the space between us, and stomped out of the house into the night air. The bar had become my refuge. The neon sign above the entrance was like a dull invitation to drown my sorrows. Nights blowed into each other. I'd slouch on a stool, nursing whiskey after whiskey, recounting my misery to whoever cared enough to listen, or to no one at all. Sometimes I'd just talk to the bartender, a grizzled old man who'd been around the block. He never offered pity, just a sympathetic nod or the occasional grunt. "Women, man," he'd say, wiping the counter. "What you gonna do?" I drained my glass and glare at the reflection in the bar mirror. I saw a man older than his years, drained, hollow. I remembered the watch on my wrist. My father's watch. He'd left it to me with the words, "Keep time where it matters." But that meaning felt far away now. I wasn't keeping time for anything good. I was living in the moment of my revenge, repeating it day after day like a broken record. Isabella kept trying to fix it. She'd call out to me in the mornings, "Mark, can we talk?" Or, "Mark, please listen." I'd brush her off, heading out the door with my jacket slung over my shoulder, not bothering to look back. She once even cornered me as I grabbed my keys. "What do you want me to do, Mark?" she said, voice trembling. "Nothing," I said coldly. "The damage is done." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I'm sorry. Saying sorry doesn't erase what you did." I shook her hand off my arm. "You think a word can fix my nights spent wondering who you were with, who you touched? I can't even sleep in our bed without seeing him in there." She let her hand drop. I left without another word. Sometimes I think about the night I drove to Enzo's dance studio. It was after hours. The place was empty, lights off, but I gleaned from a quick phone call that he tended to stay late practicing. I parked in the shadows, walked around, found the back door. It was locked. I could see light seeping from beneath it. My heart pounded, and my mind was a mess of fantasies. Violence, confrontation, spitting curses in his face. But then I pictured the consequences. The headlines, a ruined life, maybe jail. My fists clenched, my nails digging into my palms. Rage was a living beast inside me, roaring for blood. But I kept it caged, left him unscathed for the time being. That memory still haunts me. I stood there in the alley, trembling with so much adrenaline I could have torn down a brick wall. But I did nothing. Walked away. Because, ironically, my father taught me to keep a semblance of dignity. Even as my world crumbled, I clung to that last thread of control. I mentioned a DNA test. Let me clarify. We'd been trying for a child. All those nights we planned, all the times we hoped. When the test results implied something was off, I had to know for sure. The suspicion nearly drove me mad. So I took a step that feels cruel even now. I insisted on a paternity test, demanded it. She refused at first, then tearfully relented. The results were conclusive. There was no baby to speak of, no pregnancy at all. But the medical test revealed something else, some detail that confirmed her affair. She tested positive for an infection I didn't have, a minor one, but proof enough that she'd been intimate with someone else. She never even told me about it. I found out first, watched her stammer to explain. That was the final nail in the coffin of my love. "Why didn't you tell me?" I'd hissed. She shook her head, tears streaming. I was embarrassed, scared. I thought I could take care of it quietly. Quietly, I repeated, as though tasting the word. "How many more secrets have you been keeping quietly?" She had no answer. I walked away. A moment always comes in a man's life when he has to decide if he'll remain the bigger person or become the monster he's been fighting. I stared at my reflection again in that damned bathroom mirror. The same mirror. No phone number this time. But I still saw the faint smudges where I'd scrubbed it away. I touched them, feeling like I was touching a scar. I closed my eyes, imagining how it could have played out differently. If only she'd come to me, told me how lonely she felt, how disconnected she'd become. Could I have fixed it? Could I have saved our marriage? Maybe. But now the time for maybes was gone. I found myself thinking about the meaning of fidelity. I remembered an old conversation with my father. He told me, "When you make a vow, it's not a chain, son. It's a promise to walk side by side. You break it, you're not just hurting another person, you're cutting off a piece of your own soul." And now I saw the truth. By destroying Isabella for her betrayal, I was cutting off pieces of my own soul, day by day, word by word. I'd become a bitter husk, filled with revenge instead of love. Did it satisfy me? Maybe for a moment. Each time I humiliated her in front of someone. Her sister, neighbors, her dance friends. A hot surge of satisfaction pulsed in my veins, but it faded quickly, leaving me with nothing but emptiness. Every day I told myself I was justified, that I was defending my honor. Yet something deeper whispered that I was just as guilty now, dragging both of us into misery. In trying to avenge my wounds, I was ensuring I'd never truly heal. One evening, I came home late. She wasn't in the living room. Usually, she waited there, trying to talk, but not this time. I found her in the kitchen, hunched over the table, foam clutched in her hand. She didn't even glance at me when I walked in. "What's going on?" I asked, the hostility in my voice a default setting now. She muttered something I couldn't catch. "What?" She looked up. Her eyes were red, tears staining her cheeks. "He left," she whispered. I snorted. Enzo. A slow, miserable nod. "He's gone back to Italy for a few months. Some family thing. Or maybe he's found someone else. I don't know. Doesn't matter. He's gone. And it hurts like hell." Part of me wanted to lash out, to scold her for the nerve of being upset that her lover ditched her. But I just stared, feeling a strange emptiness. Wasn't I supposed to feel triumph that he'd left her in the dust? Instead, I felt a hollow sense of pity. She was broken, but she'd done the breaking first. She set her phone down. "I'm sorry," she said, voice rough. "I'm sorry for everything." In that moment, I saw not a conniving cheater but a woman who'd lost her way. She made a choice that destroyed our marriage, and she was paying for it too. She reached out her hand, eyes desperate for even the slightest sympathy. I backed away. I wasn't ready to give her that, not after the illusions of marriage had died so violently. "I can't do this," I said simply, then walked away to the bedroom. She didn't follow. Her desperation grew in the days that followed. She started searching online, apparently looking for new dance partners or men with certain qualities, someone who reminded her of him. I overheard phone calls. I saw the notes scrawled in her planner. She was trying to fill the void, but her attempts came off as pathetic, frantic. She'd meet people for coffee, for a quick chat, but returned each time more deflated, more lost. Maybe she realized how hollow it was to replace one betrayal with another ephemeral fling. Or maybe she was just too far gone. As for me, I took a different route. I started seeing someone else too, ironically. A woman named Gwen. Nothing like Isabella. I met her at a sales conference. She was older than Isabella, calm, steady. She didn't set my heart ablaze with wild passion, but she offered conversation without drama. I told her about my messy marriage. She listened, occasionally placing a hand on my shoulder. Something in that gentle contact made me feel less dead. I didn't jump into bed with her. Didn't want that. But I kept her number, saw her for lunches, let her presence soothe the storm in my mind. I wish I could say I felt relief. In truth, I felt guilty for wanting comfort anywhere. But guilt was overshadowed by a deeper exhaustion. My soul was battered, and I just needed someone, to make me feel like living wasn't a constant war zone. Days passed, then weeks. The scandal I'd unleashed was unstoppable. Isabella's name was tarnished among neighbors and family. People whispered behind her back. She grew quieter, more reserved. She tried to keep teaching her fitness classes, but attendance dropped. Word had spread. Some people relished in the drama. Others were simply uncomfortable. It was a cruel reality that my campaign of vengeance had taken away part of her livelihood too. Then one day, I got a text from her sister Patricia. "We need to talk." We met at a small diner. The moment Patricia sat down across from me, I saw the tension in her features. She looked like she was facing a firing squad. "Mark, I know you're hurt," she began, stirring her coffee nervously. "But what you're doing to Isabella, it's—" "Don't defend her," I warned. She took a shaky breath. "I'm not defending what she did. She broke her vows. She was wrong. But she's my sister, and she's spiraling. People are turning on her. She can't even go to the grocery store without feeling their stares. Please, Mark, lighten up on her. Let her live. I didn't respond right away. My mind was spinning. Did I want to keep punishing her? Did I want to see her crumble completely? The bitterness inside me whispered yes, she earned this. But something else, a flicker of old compassion, reminded me that the woman I once loved still existed somewhere behind those tear-streaked eyes. She should have thought of that before she slept with him, I said flatly, trying to keep my heart cold. Patricia's eyes shone with tears. She knows, Mark. Trust me. But do you really want to keep punishing her? Is that who you want to be? Her question cut deep. I turned my gaze to the window, noticing the cars rolling by, the bright Texas sun blasting the asphalt. Did I want to be that man forever? I don't know what I want, I admitted. She ruined me. Patricia nodded. I know, and I'm sorry, but you're also ruining yourself. I can see it in your face. You're not the Mark I grew up with. We fell silent. After a while, she stood up, dropped a few bills on the table, and left. I stared at my reflection in the diner window, feeling more hollow than ever. I drove home on autopilot. My heart hammered in my chest like it wanted out. I turned off the ignition and just sat there, watching the sun set over the rooftops. Something snapped in my mind, and I realized how sick I felt. Sick of being angry, sick of humiliating her, sick of feeling dead inside. I remembered a conversation I once had with my father about regrets. He always said, "Son, you either move on or you let it eat you alive. There's no middle ground." I stepped into the house, expecting gloom. Instead, I heard quiet music, some old tango track, ironically. I found Isabella in the living room, rummaging through boxes. The place was a mess. I cleared my throat, and she jumped. "Oh, sorry," she said, turning off the music. I was looking for something. I noticed tears on her cheeks again. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "What are you looking for?" I asked, and my tone was softer than it had been in weeks. She hesitated. "Some old photographs from when we first met, I guess. I don't know why. I just needed to remember who we used to be." There was a beat of silence. Then I walked to the couch and sat down heavily. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We used to be happy." She nodded, trembling, then started to sob. Not the controlled, quiet tears, but deep, painful sobs that racked her body. I watched her, not sure if I should comfort her. My anger still churned, but it felt muted. After a few moments, I found myself speaking. "You destroyed me," I said, voice almost numb. "You lied. You slept with him. You humiliated me in front of my own heart." She sank to her knees, her gaze locked on the floor. "I know," she managed between sobs. "I don't expect your forgiveness, Mark." "Then why are you still here?" I asked, and I genuinely wanted to know. She lifted her gaze, tears streaking her cheeks. "Because part of me thinks you might still love me, despite everything. And because this is my home too. I have nowhere else to go." I stared at her, feeling the remnants of my fury swirl. "Do I still love you?" I repeated. The question echoed in my mind. Once, I would have said yes without hesitation. Now, the word felt foreign. She waited, face crumpled, waiting for my answer. When none came, she wiped her tears with the back of her hand and began to pack away the scattered photos. I said nothing more, just watched her. A week later, I found myself at the same bar. Marcus was there, sipping his beer. "How you holding up?" he asked. I shrugged. "Don't know. Half the time I want to burn the house down. The other half I want to run away and start over." He nodded, eyes somber. "Makes sense, but you gotta pick a path. Man, you can't just exist in limbo." "Is that a philosophical line you read somewhere?" I asked, half smiling. He snorted. "I'm not that deep. Just letting you know that life won't wait for you to make sense of this." We drank in silence. I thought about revenge, how I'd been humiliating Isabella, The satisfaction was wearing thin. All that was left was a sour taste in my mouth. I pictured the look on her face when she found out Enzo left. The shock, the heartbreak. She got what she deserved, right? So why did I feel so hollow? Marcus slapped my back. "You'll figure it out, Mark." I gave a curt nod and downed the rest of my drink. That same evening, I drove around aimlessly before going home. I ended up at a small park, one of those suburban green spaces with a few benches and a duck pond. The moon was bright. I parked, got out, and walked toward the water. The reflection of the moon rippled on the surface, distorting with the gentle movement of the pond. I stood there, leaning against a railing, and felt tears prick my eyes for the first time. I rubbed them away, ashamed of how weak I felt. "I don't know what I feel," I murmured again, hearing my own voice echo in the still night. I was so tired, a bone-deep weariness that made me wonder if living was even worth it. The strangest thought crossed my mind. I can't keep going like this. I have to do something final. Something that ends this nightmare. But did that mean leaving her? Did it mean forgiving her? Or did it mean giving in to the bleakness that had haunted me? The thought that maybe I'd be better off gone. I don't claim to be a saint. If anything, I was leaning toward darkness. I recalled how I used to see the world. Steady, predictable. Now it felt as though I was standing on shifting sand, about to be swallowed whole. I stared at the moonlit pond for a long time, imagining my father's voice, imagining the man I used to be. He'd be disgusted by how I'd turned my life into a spectacle of vengeance. But he might also understand that a broken vow leaves scars you never fully heal. Eventually, I went home. No more bar, no more drifting. I parked in the driveway, noticing Isabella's car. I walked inside. She was at the kitchen table, a cup of cold tea in front of her. She looked at me, eyes wary, but didn't say a word. I sat down across from her. The house was silent. "Tell me about him," I said abruptly. I don't know why those words came out, but they did. Her eyebrows lifted. "Why?" "Because I need to know what you saw in him that you didn't see in me. Maybe I'm just punishing myself, but I need to understand." She swallowed hard, tracing a finger around the rim of her mug. "He was exciting," she admitted quietly. "He made me feel alive, like I was someone more than just a bored wife going through the motions. When I danced with him, it felt like the whole world vanished, and only the music remained." I let out a slow breath. "And me. Did I ever make you feel that way?" She looked up, tears welling in her eyes again. "You used to. But life got in the way. Work, bills, responsibilities. We forgot how to dance, metaphorically speaking. I was lonely, Mark. I felt a wave of resentment, but also an odd flicker of sadness. I guess I got caught up in being a provider, in paying the mortgage, in planning for a future. I thought that was enough." She sniffed, wiping her eyes. "I know. And I should have talked to you. Instead, I threw myself into this reckless affair, thinking it would fix something. It didn't. It just broke everything more." We sat in silence. Her confession was raw, hurting me all over again, but also clarifying something. She'd wanted me to show her that same passion. Instead, I'd let the everyday grind bury it. The next day, an odd calm settled over me. I went to work, did my job. I came home, found her cooking dinner. She glanced at me uncertainly, as though expecting an outburst, but I had none left. We ate in near silence, the air thick with unresolved tension. And then, after we put away the dishes, we sat on the living room couch like two ghosts sharing a crypt. "You look like you're going to say something," she said. I nodded. "I don't know how long we can keep living like strangers." She exhaled shakily. "I know. I keep hoping you might. Forgive me. But I realize that might never happen." I rubbed a hand over my face, feeling the stubble. "I honestly don't know if I can. But I also can't keep devoting my life to hating you. It's eating me from the inside." She bowed her head. "I'm sorry, Mark." I stared at her, My wife of so many years, the woman who'd shared my bed, my name, my future. Could I let go of the revenge I'd crafted so meticulously? Could I be the bigger man and walk away, if not with forgiveness, then at least with some dignity? I think I'm done, I said quietly. She looked up, alarmed. Done? With the revenge? With the bitterness? I searched her face. That doesn't mean things are magically fixed. It just means I'm tired of this war. A hint of relief flickered in her eyes. I understand. We sat there a while longer, the clock ticking softly in the background. I could hear my father's voice echoing in my head. When you break a vow, you cut off a piece of your soul. Maybe we'd both lost pieces of our souls. Could we be whole again? I didn't have an answer, but I was ready to stop the bleeding. Life didn't improve overnight. The gossip still circulated, and Isabella wore shame like a cloak. But I no longer fueled that fire. When neighbors whispered, I walked past them without comment. When her sister asked how I was doing, I simply said, I'm working through it. The hatred inside me simmered but never reached boiling again. Isabella tried to make amends in small ways. She'd cook my favorite meals, greet me at the door with a tentative smile. Sometimes we talk about mundane things, like groceries or bills, avoiding the bigger issues. We were two people tiptoeing around a crater of broken trust. I still saw Gwen occasionally for coffee, more out of a need for friendly conversation than anything else. She knew the situation, and she respected my space. After a while, I told her we should stop seeing each other. I could tell she felt a pang of disappointment, but she agreed. I wasn't ready to jump from one shattered relationship into another. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. One night, Isabella approached me. She'd lost weight, her eyes heavy with sadness. She said, I'm leaving for a while. I blinked. Where? I don't know yet. Maybe San Diego, to see my parents, or somewhere else. I need to find myself again. She fiddled with the ring on her finger. We need space, don't we? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to argue. Another part realized she was probably right. Yeah, I finally said. We need space. She nodded, tears forming. I'll pack a few things. I'll call from the road. Please, take care of yourself. I didn't respond. She turned and walked into our bedroom, the weight of her guilt trailing behind her like a shadow. She left early the next morning. I heard the car engine, felt a wave of conflicting emotions, but I stayed in bed. It was easier that way. When I finally got up, I found a note on the kitchen counter. Mark, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you find peace. I'm sorry for everything. You'll always have a place in my heart. Izzy. Her wedding ring was next to the note. I picked it up, stared at the band. It felt cold, lifeless. I put it in a drawer, not sure what else to do. Weeks turned into months. I lived alone in that house, haunted by memories, but slowly the wound scabbed over. My anger dulled. I focused on work, poured myself into my sales position, traveled a bit. I even visited an old friend in Dallas, got out of Houston for a while. One afternoon, I found myself rummaging through the closet, coming across boxes of photographs. They showed me and Isabella in happier times, our wedding day, vacations by the Gulf, silly moments on a random Tuesday. We looked so young, so hopeful. I felt an ache deep in my chest. But it wasn't a raging hatred anymore, just a profound sadness for what we'd lost. I also found a pair of her ballet slippers, relics from the days when she'd still taught dance. They were worn, frayed at the edges. I held them, thinking of the woman who'd once dazzled me with her graceful movements. Then I thought of Enzo, the man who'd been a better dancer, a more exciting partner, at least in her eyes. The sting was still there, but it was duller now. In time, people stopped whispering about us. The neighbors moved on to new gossip. My friends didn't bring it up, or if they did, I'd shake my head and say, let's talk about something else. I realized that as I let go, the drama around me faded too. I heard that Enzo eventually returned to Houston, tried to reopen his classes. I never saw him, never confronted him. Maybe that was for the best. We were like parallel lines that had no reason to meet. I'm not sure I'd have felt anything but indifference if I ran into him. Or maybe I'd break his jaw. Hard to say. Isabella called me once, about 3 months after she left. We spoke for an hour, danced around the topic of us. She sounded tired but slightly freer, as if the time away had cleared her head. She didn't ask to come home. I didn't offer. At the end of the call, she said, "Thank you for picking up." I just told her to take care. Little by little, I discovered something about revenge. It doesn't heal. It only spreads poison. At first, I'd wanted to ruin her, but all I did was ruin myself along the way. I lost my dignity, my compassion. I turned into a spiteful man who couldn't see past his own rage. Now, with her gone, the house quiet, I began to rebuild. I realized that maybe I'd never fully trust anyone again, but at least I could trust the man I wanted to be. The final confrontation with my demons came late one night. I'd had a terrible dream, full of images. Isabella and Enzo pressed together. The phone number on the mirror, the humiliating stares from neighbors, everything swirling in a nightmarish loop. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop. Then, in the darkness, I whispered, "I can't do this anymore." I turned on the bedside lamp, rummaged in the drawer, and found her ring. I held it under the soft light, turning it slowly between my fingers. I thought about throwing it away, about pawning it, about leaving it somewhere. But instead, I just stared at it, tears filling my eyes. I realized I was crying for the first time in a long while. Real tears, not forced by whiskey or anger. Tears for what we'd had, for what we lost, for the man I'd become. My father's watch ticked on my wrist. Time was passing, unstoppable. And I was still here, alive. Not well, not whole, but alive. In that moment, a wave of clarity washed over me. I understood that no matter how much I tried to punish her, I'd end up punishing myself. Because a vow, once broken, scars both sides. The next day, I packed up some of Isabella's belongings. The ballet slippers, a few photos, her ring, and stored them away. I didn't do it out of malice, but out of a quiet acceptance that we were done. If she ever came back to retrieve them, fine. If not, at least they were kept safe. I began to see more of Gwen, this time with no illusions. We took it slow, got to know each other in a casual, almost tentative way. There was no grand spark of romance, but it felt steady. She understood my scars, respected my boundaries. For now, that was enough. One afternoon, I was having coffee with her when Isabella called. I hesitated before answering, stepping outside to talk. She asked how I was, said she was doing better. She'd found a small place on the outskirts of San Diego, was teaching dance again. The conversation was oddly peaceful. At the end, she said, "Mark, I want you to be happy. We both deserve that, after all this." I exhaled, feeling a weight lift slightly. "Yeah," I replied. "We do." Looking back, I won't pretend there's a tidy bow tying up this story. The pain doesn't vanish overnight. The anger sometimes resurfaces, especially when I see a couple dancing in a restaurant or pass by a dance studio. But I'm learning to let it pass through me instead of devouring me. I used to think I'd never love again. But I see glimmers of possibility now. I see that my life isn't over just because one relationship died. I see that maybe the next time I fall, I'll hold on to that spark before it fades into routine. Because ironically, Isabella wasn't wrong about one thing. People need to feel alive in their relationships. We let ours stagnate, and that left the door open for disaster. I still wear my father's watch. I keep it wound, keep it ticking, a reminder that time moves forward whether I'm ready or not. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I wonder if I could have saved my marriage had I tried harder. Then I recall the haunting images of her and Enzo, and I accept that some betrayals run too deep to mend. A year passes. I get news from a mutual friend that Isabel is fully immersed in teaching dance again, traveling for workshops. She's found a measure of peace, or so they say. Enzo, for all I know, is out there charming someone else. And I've found my footing with Gwen. We're not moving fast, but we're moving. We have dinners, see movies, talk about life in an honest way. Sometimes we mention my past. Sometimes we don't. She never judges, just listens. I've learned that vengeance is a monster that lives inside me. A monster I fed with every angry word and public humiliation. Once unleashed, it devoured everything in its path, including parts of my own humanity. Now, I'm done feeding it. I'm letting it starve. Slowly, it's shriveling, though the memory of its power still lingers. I don't know if Isabella will ever truly atone for what she did in my eyes. But I do know I'm not carrying the torch of hatred anymore. I've laid that down. Let her live her life. Let me live mine. For too long, my heart was a battlefield. Now maybe it can be a place of quiet reflection. In the end, I realize I'm not the same man I was when this all started. Maybe that's the real tragedy of betrayal. You never come out the other side unchanged. The love I once felt has been transformed into something else. Part heartbreak, part lesson learned, part acceptance that sometimes the closest people to you can inflict the deepest wounds. I remember a time when I dreamed of dying, just to escape the pain. I saw no other way out. But ironically, it's by living, by dragging myself through the days, facing the shame, tasting the bitterness, that I found a sort of rebirth. I remain scared, but I'm breathing, moving, hoping for better days. There's a grim satisfaction in surviving your own darkness. That's the story, I guess. It's not pretty, not heroic, but it's real. It's what happened. If you want a neat ending, you won't find it here. The best I can offer is this. I've learned that even when your world burns down, you can walk away from the ashes. You might limp, you might crawl, you might hate every step, but eventually you stand again. I used to stare in the mirror, wishing I could erase the man I saw there. Now I look in the mirror and see a survivor, a flawed man who's still got a life to live. I see a guy who carries old wounds but isn't letting them define his every breath. It's enough for me, and that's all there is to say. The rest is just time, ticking away, offering new beginnings if I have the guts to seize them. So, yeah, I'm done with the past. I've already found someone who's nothing like her, and I'm finally free. If that's not a happy ending, at least it's a chapter closed, and sometimes that's the best we can hope for.